Hello, hello, all. Welcome back to the Exposing Grief YouTube channel, where we begin to remove that stigma of grief and expose it for what it truly is, which is a natural and healthy way of living and loving. I am excited to introduce this new interviewee to you. She is Moon Rabbit. She is going to talk to you about death charts. She's an astrologer. She has her own practice, Astrology by Moon Rabbit. And I invited her on to talk about this new element of her practice, death charts. So let's not wait another minute. Let's jump right in. Take it away, Moon. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for hopping on. I'm excited to introduce the interview that we have for this month. Her name is Moon Zlotnick, and she is the owner of Astrology by Moon Rabbit. So I'm not going to waste another minute. I'm going to turn it over to her. So Moon, please share a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your practice or business, Astrology by Moon Rabbit.
Okay, so I got interested in astrology when I was in college, which was in the late 60s and early 70s. I got a reading from somebody who was practicing to be an astrologer, and she said something to me about something that happened that nobody could have possibly known. It was absolutely astonishing, and I decided right then and there I have to learn this. So I went to the public library, and there was one astrology book. So I took that book home and I started teaching myself how to interpret charts.
Wow.
So that was, well, I got into it super seriously like 75, 76, 77. It was a very long time ago.
That's awesome. So you're kind of self-taught a little bit. At least your beginning interest was self-taught.
Right, right.
Yes.
I found a teacher in 77 and got certified, but things have changed a lot since then. So getting certified now is a much bigger deal.
Absolutely. So how did that passion grow into becoming certified and then having your own business, Astrology by Moon Rabbit? How did that process go?
Well, I mean, I found something that helped me make sense of the world, and it helped me make sense of people, and it helped me make sense of why things happened when they happened. So I just kept studying, and people said, gee, you're really good at this. What else can you do? So I kept developing new things, and it just became its own thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Like a passion. It's a passion that, it's really never waned for me.
I love that. And so tell us a little bit more about your business, Astrology by Moon Rabbit.
Well, I do what a lot of other astrologers do. I do birth charts, which is a way to get this very universal, non-judgmental description of who you really are. And it talks about, personality, but it goes much deeper than that. It talks about your past lives and your soul's journey. And it talks about all kinds of strengths that you have available to you and different kinds of struggles, but different ways to look at those and understand them. And then I do forecasts, which I think most people associate with astrology.
Sure.
And the forecasts are not, you can't really tell what will happen, but there certainly are cycles that repeat, and you can go back and look at what happened the last time or two times and generally get a perspective about what might be coming. So I do forecasts, I do comparison charts for people. Any two people, you can look at how they intersect and what makes things great and what might make things a little bit challenging. But one of the reasons that we're here today is that in 2005, I lost my identical twin sister. And I did happen to be with her when she died. And being an astrologer, I looked at the time and I did a chart for her death, which never would have occurred to me without this tragedy in my life. But after kind of processing that loss and then looking at what was happening in the heavens, I decided to offer a death chart reading to my clients as a way to help them work through their grief. And so since 2015 now, I've added that to my services.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, and that was where we were headed. And obviously, like you said, the reason you're here today. So I'm so excited to talk about it because I think it's a very unique approach. And I myself am excited to learn more, and I'm excited to bring it to the viewers as well of how that can help one's grieving process. So talk to us a little bit more about what death charts are.
Well, so a birth chart is the date, place, and time the baby's born.
Yeah.
The death chart is the date, place, and time the person takes their last breath. So everything in the birth chart is dependent on the first breath. Everything in the death chart is dependent on the last breath. And it's a marker for a kind of different passage. So at the beginning we have life, right? And everybody's like, yay, yay. But there's another passage that we're all going to go through, which is whatever happens next. And so the death chart is in and of itself is kind of interesting because it will have, I don't know how to describe it. It will have a storyline about what was going on before the last breath, during the last breath, and after the last breath. So there'll be energy patterns that are there. And sometimes it will talk about the soul and what it was like for the soul to pass. Other times it will talk more about the circumstance. But okay, so it's only part of what's important. The real reason I started doing this is that it offers the person who's grieving a path forward. So, when we lose someone, there's a period of time where you don't know who you are anymore and you question everything. And even for some people, you feel like, well, why would I even bother going forward, And so I take that death chart, I superimpose it on the person's birth chart, and it always talks about what I call a path forward. So it doesn't diminish the loss, it just gives some languaging to people about, well, it might not seem this way now, but in a few years, this could possibly be an outcome of a loss or part of what your soul is journeying to understand now is precipitated by the loss, and this is how you can work with it.
Yes, I love that. That's beautiful. And that aligns a lot with some of the work, a lot of the work I do with my clients of this idea of, you're speaking of this piece of like, I don't know who I am anymore, right? So really, and it's like, where do I start? Where do I begin? They know something's missing. They know they have to move forward, but they don't know what that looks like. So I love that these death charts can really start kind of creating that path or really carving that path for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So would you say that that would be the biggest benefit death charts have on grief journeys, or are there other ways? What are some of the other ways?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you probably also see that people have an enormous amount of guilt when somebody dies. And there's a burden of responsibility often people will be carrying, feeling like, well, if I'd done this or this or this, maybe then I wouldn't have lost them. And one of the things that I really focus on in the death chart is that part that I think of as the soul's journey. And so often there's a very clear kind of, I don't know how to describe this, So astrology is based on the idea that our high self will pick the entrance point so that the date, place, and time will line up with the exact vehicle that we need in order to evolve. Okay. And that leaving point, that end point has that same energy. And it really takes the loss out of that framework of that individual and that their burden of responsibility isn't part of the story. It really changes the story into the soul's journey of the person who passed.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah, and so I talk too with clients about kind of what's your narrative, right? What's the narrative around the loss, and how do we rewrite that story? So it sounds like death charts can kind of guide clients around that piece too.
Yes, in fact,
I love that.
it can.
Is there ever a time where death charts may not be beneficial to one's grief journey?
Yes. Um, I think, although I'm routinely surprised by this, but I think immediately after the loss, um, I mean, some people may be in a headspace where they can take in information, but I think most people who are deeply, deeply immersed in grief can't. And so
Mhm.
then it just becomes like a bunch of words. I think they need to spend time with a grief therapist first. Um, and recently I've had people asking me, you know, can I see if the person they lost is happy, or like what are they up to on the other side? I don't have that information. My information is really about the client and
Mhm.
how you can find your way back to happiness, or at least closer to acceptance, possibly.
Yeah.
But there are people who are very, very gifted psychic mediums,
Right.
and they dead people talk to them. So then they're the right people, not me, for that kind of
Yeah.
encounter.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I appreciate that you provide that distinction, right? Because and I'm guessing you provide that distinction because you've had many clients come to you and ask that question. But I would
Yes.
imagine that I mean, I've even have clients, not that they ask me, but they communicate that of like, I just want to know if they're happy or if they're okay or if they're safe or what are they doing, right? So yeah, I
Right.
would
Yeah.
imagine they would come to you for that. So I
Right.
appreciate that you make that
Right.
distinction.
Right.
So you say someone who is new in their grief or really heavy in their grief may benefit from therapy first.
Yeah.
So what might be some things that someone would recognize that would let them know, okay, grief or excuse me, death charts might be a good step for me to take or a good thing for me to integrate in my process. What might they
When,
start doing?
when people are asking themselves this more kind of self-directed questions about who am I now? Or how can I find something meaningful to move myself forward a little bit? When they're in more of that, I mean, I don't want to use the word acceptance because I think it takes such a long time.
Sure.
But when they're feeling more self focus, and it's not so much like, well, what about my mom? And, what's happening to her? Where it's like, okay, I'm still alive now. What
Mm,
can I do with the life that I so gratefully still have?
wonderful. Yeah. I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you for
Thank you. Yeah.
the distinction and process. Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like our viewers to know about astrology and grief? So not necessarily the death charts, but are there any other ways that astrology might benefit someone's grief journey?
Well, I think, part of life is that we are constantly being confronted with loss.
Mhm.
And after we have a really big loss, then every other loss triggers or re-stimulates that early one. And sometimes people can't sort out what's coming from where.
Mm.
And the birth chart is a really good vehicle to give people insight, particularly about uh, inherited trauma or early family trauma.
Sure.
And when that, when a death will trigger that or stimulate it in some way, then you have these like extra layers that the person has to deal with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes I think that, there are these very complicated forms of grief, where you don't get to say goodbye to the person, or you're adopted and you just found like your biological parent and then they die, or do you know what I mean? And sometimes, especially like in that last example, if you can get birth information about somebody, then that can help you kind of just process things differently.
Mhm.
So I just tell people, there's this value that astrology brings, because there's this whole language that gives you an understanding of this cosmic perspective that in normal everyday life, we're just so busy putting one foot in front of the other to survive that we forget we're
Yes.
children of the universe and we're part of this big, vast cosmic picture. And it's very, very reassuring to be connected with that again.
Sure. Love that. Love it. For the viewers who are interested or want to dive a little bit deeper, can you speak a little bit to what a typical session with you might look like, as well as the best way for them to contact you?
Um, uh, so if you're interested in a death chart session, or basically any other session, I would need your date, place, and an accurate birth time for you. And then if it's a loss, I need the date, place. And most people will go with a coroner's report for the time of death. If you weren't there, that, there's a lot of wiggle room in that, but that's what we use. And so then I'll set up a Zoom meeting, and probably the first 15 or 20 minutes, I'll just talk to you about all of the energy patterns that were present when the person passed. And a little bit, sometimes I can see into what I think of as the process. So there are some really, really easy leave takings. And then there are some more strenuous or complicated leave takings. We'll talk a little bit about just that time, but the bulk of the session is focused on the grieving person. What are the paths forward for you, and how can you start to engage with some of these really specific tools that are shown by what's happening in your chart?
Love that. And is it just one session, or do you do follow-up sessions? Typically, how often are you meeting with
Oh,
clients?
that's really interesting. I actually haven't thought about follow-up sessions. So no, at this point, I'm just meeting with people once.
Okay. Okay. But are you open to follow-up sessions if
I
they have
am.
further questions, or
I
okay,
am open to
perfect.
follow-up sessions.
Perfect. Wonderful. And what's the best way for them to get a hold of you? Email,
My
phone?
Well, I think to go over to my website,
Okay.
astrologybymoonrabbit.com. There's tons of information there. There's also a scheduling feature, but feel free to reach out to me by email. It's moonrabbitastrology@gmail.
Perfect. And viewers, I'll put all her contact information down below, so you should be able to click on that, no problem. Do you offer any consultation, free consultation, or anything like that if people are still not really sure but want to ask a few more questions? Do you offer that feature?
Absolutely. Give me a call. It might be a day or two, but I will call you back and answer your questions.
Wonderful. Oh, well, thank you, Moon. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, thank you. No, this was a real pleasure talking to you. And I just love that you're open to kind of alternative ways to bring some different perspective into people who are dealing with
Absolutely.
loss.
Yes. Well, I thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom, and to share this new to me anyway, way of helping someone find their path forward. I really love that.
And
So viewers, thank you for joining us. If you'd like to reach out to Moon, her contact information is down below. You can reach out to myself as well. But we thank you for taking the time to view our interview today. Moon, thank you again for your time, for letting us chat with you. And we will see you guys soon. Take
thank
care.
you. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, Moon, for taking the time to let me interview you. I had a great time interviewing you and learning all about these death charts, and I'm so excited that we got to share them with our viewers. Viewers, thank you for taking the time to listen to Moon and hear about these death charts and start exploring how they might benefit your grief journey, if at all. If you have more questions, her contact information is below. You can always reach out to me. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the other content coming your way. Otherwise, thank you again for taking taking the time. Have a great rest of your March, and we'll be back in April.